Okay, so we are now recording. Many of you have probably seen that I have a couple extra credit opportunities out there. One of them was to do a presentation today. Is anybody here interested in doing that? Did anybody prepare anything for today?
I have something.
You have something? I see, Christopher, you got your hand up.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Okay. All right. So I'll tell you what, go ahead and just type your name in chat if you have something to prepare. And that way we can kind of get around to you. So we'll go in order to whoever's the quickest to type your name in there. How about that?
For the presenting, like, we can just like talk about what we found, right? We don't have to have like actual like presentation.
Yeah. If you have a presentation, great. If you if you have a PowerPoint slide, great. If you have something in the news that you want to present, just kind of enlighten us a little bit as to what you're talking about and how it ties in with child development. Okay. Before we get into that, and I will not be recording that, by the way. Well, let me ask, do any of you mind if it's recorded and if it shows up? If you don't, that's okay. Okay. Nobody objects? Okay. All right. And it's just our class that's going to see it. It's not going out to YouTube or anything. In fact, I stopped putting things out on YouTube just because it's a lengthy process. And the ones that are on YouTube aren't accessible to anybody. They're not even listed. So it's just listed in our class and that's it. All right. Before we get to those, I do want to remind you that one of the other extra credit assignments that I had today is the movie. It's Mockingbird Don't Sing. And it's not a great acting movie, but it portrays a very real story that happened with a young woman named Jeannie, whom we really don't know much about today, as she's really dropped off the picture out of the picture. But anyway, it's a true story, and it's very one that's very worth watching, especially when we talk about the critical periods for learning, and I'll cover that a little bit here too. But anyway, check it out. It's at 7:00 tonight. You should have the link. If you don't have the link, it's on news and announcements, so you can get that link there as well. Hopefully some of you can come out and check it out. So the format of that is I'll play that movie. This is the first time I've tried an entire movie. I've tested it on my own personal devices and it seems to work. So it might get choppy at times depending on your network. But for the most part, I've got a pretty reliable network here and it should be able to broadcast okay. So anyway, the format is we'll have you get in there. I'm going to check everybody in and I'll give you the instructions on how to do that. Have everybody check out once the movie's done. It's about an hour and 40 minutes. I already checked. It won't run into anybody that's interested in looking or watching the debate tonight. The debate's at 9. We're starting the movie at 7. It should be done right around 8:40. So you can go to the bathroom, get a bowl of popcorn and watch the debacle on at 9:00. So more entertainment after that. Anyway, after you have watched the movie, I have a quick set of questions for you to answer. Again, essay formats, APA rules apply. You don't have to do a title page if you don't want to. I'm not requiring that, but at least make sure you're getting in an essay format and not just short answers. But that's located in week 8 of assessments on D2L. Okay. Any questions on the movie or anything up until this point? Okay. All right. So I'm going to go in order here. So take it away, Kirsten.
Okay, I found an article that is about how children brought up in like greener areas have higher IQs and fewer behavioral problems, and like they have like better development. Scientists believe that children that grow up in areas that have parks and gardens will have higher levels of intelligence because they are raised in like a green environment and a healthier like lifestyle. So they all have better behavioral skills compared to children that don't have access to these types of like areas and tend to have like less tantrums from this and being able to go outdoors. And there's a research team from a university in Belgium that has been studying this topic for a while, and they have noticed like some gains in IQs when they live in urban areas with residential green spaces. And they've done this study a few times already, and they have all shown to have like very positive outcomes. They pulled over like 700 different kids from the same residential area that were between like the ages of 8 and 15, and they lived within like a 3 kilometer radius of one another, and they all had about a 2.6 point higher IQ living in that area compared to like some other areas. And they had noticed that these children were a lot more attentive and had like less anger issues. And they also looked at like some social and economic factors, and they were very like compatible with this area. And the green cities are very important for like development of a child because they create a healthy environment where all kids can interact and play, so they can be like more connected to nature. And it just creates an all around like great environment for them to let out their energy. So for like our last chapter, chapter 8, like I know we were talking about IQ levels, and like it discussed how exposing children to stimulating experiences outside of the home is like very important, and a child's environment has like a big influence on their development, especially when children come from more economically advantaged homes compared to children that aren't in that have like a disadvantage, and they tend to have lower IQs. So the areas where these kids are raised do have an effect on their intelligence, and because they have more opportunities compared to kids that are disadvantaged, and it will help them develop more of a quality lifestyle and helps their development.
Okay, very cool. Go ahead.
Mhm. The only other thing I was going to say was with society is that children that are in a more stable, healthier environment have reduced stress and anxiety. So when people feel less stressed, they tend to perform better. So it's important to constantly push for more of these green areas because they have shown many great results for people.
Okay, all right. Does anybody have any questions or comments for Kirsten? All right,
This,
go ahead.
I got. And do you personally believe that's true, or do you think it isn't true? Like, do you think kids not be able to like go outside more do have a higher IQ, or not?
I think that kids that have like that advantage of being able to go to like parks and explore like in nature and interact with things do have like a greater advantage, which can really help their development and their IQ.
All right. Any other questions? So what I really appreciated about this, what you present, I actually have not heard of this. It's not surprising to me, but I mean, there's just so much to unpack from that. I mean, you talked about stable households, you talked about going outside, which is important. Exercise is important in child development. Having a stable household, that's important for attachment and modeling good relationship behaviors, right? So yeah, so much to really, I think I could probably talk about this for an entire class, but one of the other important things we'll talk about is growth hormones and how growth hormones are stifled with children that endure high levels of stress and prolonged levels of stress, like maybe coming from a traumatic childhood experience, or maybe even turbulence within the home or between the parents. So growth hormones is a factor because we need growth hormones to repair our bodies and help us, especially at that age, grow our organs and even repair any kind of damage or any kind of growth that's occurring in the mind, in the brain. So I am curious, Kirsten. So was this was primarily in a European setting, right?
Yes, I'm pretty sure that it was from like a British news source.
Okay. All right. Yes. And when you look at these topics and you look at these news reports, kind of pay attention to where in the world they are, because what may work in Europe may not necessarily work in the United States, right? So, or in a Middle Eastern country, for example. So, and that's great. I mean, that's a good start. So what the normal track that they would follow with this is maybe take that study and replicate it in different cultures and different areas to see if there are any differences or if they're going to be alike. All right. So very good. Thank you, Kirsten. All right, Christopher, you're up next.
All right, let's do this. So I found an article from Science Daily. I'm not sure how good of a source it is. I mean, it looks pretty good. It goes over speech, and more specifically, the style of speech spoken from the parents that produces the greatest communication development, like within an infant. The study was from the University of Washington, and it showcases research from an experiment testing if this thing called parentese form of speech leads to a better language development. And this whole thing called parentese is like baby talk, essentially. It's like, emphasizing and making really loud gestures and things like that. So what they did was they had two specific groups of parents that they had. One where they were coached individually, like one-on-one with a speech therapist or something like that through continuing months. And then one control group that had a group that wasn't taught the method of this parentese. And so what they found was that following the weeks, I believe it was like six for weekends 6, 10, and 14 and 18. They put this little like device on the babies that was like a little recorder. So it actually recorded all of the interactions between the parents and the child. And what they found is that, this parentese compared to just regular speaking to a child increases their overall average word count by the end of the experiment. So that was it.
Okay, all right. Any questions or comments for Christopher? All right. I don't necessarily have a question for you, Christopher, but I just want to echo it, very similar to what we talked about on Tuesday, right? In fact, I think your book calls it motherese. But using that and breaking those phrases up for a little bit more of an absorption for children that are learning sounds and learning syllables. Because when we talk, it's like an endless stream of sounds, and we don't get punctuation. Sometimes we'll break in between sentences, but for the most part, it's just a constant stream of sound. So anytime that we can break that up a little bit more for children's minds, they're sponges. They're learning language automatically. We're going to talk about some of the theories as to why that occurs, but they're already busy. So kind of breaking that out a little bit more for them and letting them get used to those sounds so that they get more of a routine and they are able to associate it a little easier with whatever symbol or person or whatever it is you're trying to associate with happens at a greater rate. And as you mentioned, Chris, word count. We want to increase word count because that's very important. There are a lot of studies that show that word count at any age really dictates how well their grammar is formed. So if you have, for example, if you have a child that's 2 that has a 400 word count, and a child that's 7 that has a 400 word count, their understanding of syntax and grammar is going to be exactly the same. So word count is very important. So, all right, very good job, Christopher. Thank you for that educational piece.
Yep.
All right, Amber.
Hi. So I didn't mind on cognitive behavioral like therapy that help reduce insomnia symptom among young drinkers. So I kind of did mine in more the adolescent
Okay.
age. I also got mine from Science Daily.
Mhm.
So research was to conduct to see how cognitive behavior therapy how it's like one of the like first line treatment for insomnia, but they wanted to see if it would help with like an adolescent who are actively drinking, and see if it would help them with natural signs of insomnia. The research came from the University of Missouri School of Medicine. So they took like a survey or an evaluation of 56 people. And this they asked like how many of them had at least one binge drinking episode, and a binge drinking episode usually consisted of like one sit-in where you have four to five or more drinks in one sitting, and 56% said that they had at least one in the last week. Well, 32% said that they didn't, but most of them said so they believe that it real high in adolescent now adolescent are drinking a lot more, and it caused his sign of insomnia, and so they had put them through. They wanted to see if a cognitive behavior therapy would help them, and the results of it showed that it does help a bit more than than not, because they cognitive behavior therapy help you like change your thoughts and how to like go on, like go with things, like change your habits of like the thing you're trying to change. And so they had set them up for the like with a sleep schedule, and like they put themselves on like a limit, and had not like like that, they put themselves on a limit of drinking, so it isn't causing them like that have alcohol related like harm to themselves, and yeah. I'm not the best presenter.
So, they found that the cognitive, when you say cognitive, they say what cognitive behavioral therapy was. Were they specific, or they just said CBT shows to be effective for insomnia with adolescents who drink?
Yeah, they wasn't like like fully like on what they did. They kind of just put out that they had made CBT like session that included like that were talking about like sleep hygiene, sleep restriction, relax, and like how to help them relax, and
Okay.
and they tested their behavioral experience from like when they're off the treatment, and like when they were on the treatment, how their behavior changed, the drinking and in general.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, first of all, Amber, thank you for doing that. That's very important. I regrettably, we have such a short time together. I would love to get into adolescence. I think we're going to briefly touch upon that towards the end of the semester as far as adolescent growth, but that really leads into adulthood. And I don't mean to in any way understate the importance of adolescent growth, because it is important. That's where we start developing our morals, which we'll talk about. We start developing our frontal frontal lobe is still developing, or prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for executive decisions and judgments and morals. So and then that in lies another issue is adolescents who are still developing that part of their brain. And we do know that alcohol, significant amounts of alcohol, can affect the growth of that brain. You can see, I don't even have to tell you, the long-term impact of alcohol at a young age is very serious. So yeah, very, very good report. And yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Amber. Any other questions for Amber before we get to our last presentation? Okay, excellent job, Amber. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Savannah, you're up.
So I found an article also on Science Daily, but it was originally published in the American Journal of Perinatology. It was a study by a New York, NYU Long Island School of Medicine group, and it basically linked hypothyroidism in pregnant women to ADHD in their children. And so their findings showed that women who were diagnosed with low levels of hormones in the thyroid gland having a higher risk of having a child with ADHD than those that were diagnosed during pregnancy. It also talked about how the diagnosis of hypothyroidism was greater within the first 3 months of pregnancy than the rest of it. They said that possible reasoning was that past the first trimester, the fetus begins to produce its own thyroid hormones, so it's less vulnerable to like the mother's deficiencies of it. And they had results of 24% of children were more likely to have ADHD with mothers that had these deficiencies than mothers who did not. Boys that were born to women with these low hormones were 4 times more vulnerable than girls. And then the highest risk of any ethnic group that they studied was Hispanic children. They also have their next plans of what they're going to be doing for future studies, and includes if hypothyroidism can also have an effect and a risk on other neurodevelopment disorders like epilepsy, difficulties with speech, and cerebral palsy. And also they're going to be looking into other factors of environmental toxins, like any kind of household furniture or appliances and things like that. This kind of coincided with chapter 5 in our book, because it talked a lot about ADHD, and a lot of the points that they had in the chapter were similar to what they found in the studies, like boys outnumber girls having ADHD, and that African Americans and Hispanic American children are more likely to be diagnosed and treated with ADHD. And then in chapter 2 and chapter 3, it talked about environmental hazards and the effects that it has on pregnancy. And so like that kind of coincided with what the study said, because they said the study can also help like parents manage ADHD with children because they often get diagnosed at a late age. So yeah, sorry, I speak really fast.
No, that was a good rate. All right, interesting in that. And you said hypothyroidism, not hyperthyroidism.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I have not heard that. Actually, I was under the impression that hyperthyroidism. So for those of you that don't know, the difference between hyperthyroidism and hypothyroidism is hypo is really a lack of hormones within your blood, which usually causes people to be fatigued or underactive. They may show more signs of depression. So it's really interesting. So did they really allude to anything as far as the like hypothyroidism or like the any precursors for the children that were born to hypothyroidism? Did they have like an abundance of hormones in their blood? Was there any mention of that?
I don't think so.
Okay, that's interesting. I would have thought the exact opposite of that, because if there's lack of hormones in the mother's body, yeah, I'm actually gonna probably look that one up.
Yeah.
All right.
I like Science Daily. I wasn't sure if it was like a kind of a reliable source, but they had links to where they got the information, and it was from that journal that I mentioned in the beginning. I tried looking at it. They gave like some of their data, but you need to like buy the
You got to get
I was like, I'm not gonna buy the study.
Yeah. And keep in mind, if you run into that, like for example, if it shows up in Neuroscience Weekly or something like that, check out the library. Go to Kemp Library and log in and see if we have access to those journals, because issue pays for a lot of your access to those things. So if that happens and you encounter, I do one of two ways. I'll take the title and I'll Google it and see if it is an open source somewhere, or I'll go through the library and see if I can gain access that way. But yeah, very, very interesting. And just as a side note, what you mentioned something good there, Savannah, as well. If you encounter, please do not share don't tell any professors that I told you Wikipedia is okay. But using Wikipedia as an example, if you have something that you're just researching and you're trying to get an idea, if you start at Wikipedia and they have valid, credible sources listed and you follow those sources and you can verify what they're talking about to substantiate what you're using, it's okay to use that as a guide. Don't list it. Don't ever list Wikipedia as a source. But you can certainly, and just like you mentioned, Savannah, you looked up that article, and whether you know it's credible or not, it sounded scientific, and you were able to trace it back to a reputable journal sources, which is you're still doing your due diligence. So as long as you have eyes on that source and it's saying what you're purporting, then you're okay. All right. So good job, Savannah. Good job, everybody. Really, thank you for doing that. When we have something, I have a little bit of time during the lectures that I can kind of give up a little bit, that we can do this again. Certainly, I will do that. But yeah, that's really all you needed to do. So good job, everybody. All right. Oh, I didn't ask. Did anybody have any questions for Savannah before I move off? All right. All right. So I'm going to share my screen with you here. Before I do that, though, so what we talked about on Tuesday when we last met is just how the language develops. It develops, and kind of like Christopher talked about, we hear sounds at almost after birth. Right after we're born, we start picking up on sounds. And there are some theories that suggest that we're able to hear even while in the mother's womb, during our prenatal periods, right? And there are a lot of markets that capitalize on that. I think baby Mozart have speakers that you can put up to the mother's belly. Is that a great idea? There are some there are some ideas or concepts that suggest that you're increasing the likelihood that the child is going to hear sounds or familiar sounds when they get out, which could ease their excitability, which leaves them a little bit more susceptible to learning. So a lot of theories out there as to how we pick up languages, but we do know that the more exposure to language and the more enriched the environment is for the child in terms of language, whether it's sign language or hearing, is going to be a great benefit later on. And we see that play out in higher intelligence, better jobs, more success as they grow up. So there is a direct correlation between the enriched environment. So I know your book kind of goes into more details as far as how words are formed. I'm not going to go into that, but I did want to cover how some of these theories with speaking occur. Okay, so let me share my screen. All right. So in particular, what we're going to be describing today is how what some of the theories are with grammar. All right. So grammar, put simply, excuse me, it are a set of rules and guidelines that children pick up on, because putting words and sounds together are great, but what do they mean? How does a child know that the apple is a red thing that grows on a tree? And what happens to that apple when it falls? You know, they're using a series of rules that they're picking up from, either through their environments or through their interactions. So they develop these rules in order to better communicate what their needs are. Okay, and usually that's, and when we talk about social learning, that's kind of what we'll delve into. But our first major theorist, and again, these are theories. There's really none of these that are hard and fast, but depending on your perspective, like a behaviorist theory. I'm just going to put grammar theories. Grammar development theories is really what we're looking at. All right. So the behaviorist theories basically just look at language that picks up on sounds, words, and grammar, and we learn that through imitation. If you remember the operant conditioning model, we have rewards, right? We have rewards and punishments. So according to behaviorist theories, oops, that's not what I wanted. I'm a mess today. Okay. Behaviorist theories are a set of reinforcement and punishment. Okay. Now, what do I mean by punishment? I don't mean that if a child says something incorrect, they're going to get a spanking or anything. That's not, if you remember correctly. Punishment is just trying to reduce something that is incorrect. So, for example, if a child points to a tree and says "doggy," that would be incorrect. So, in that moment, the parents would want to reduce the likelihood that behavior is going to be repeated, and maybe give them give them redirection and say that that's not a doggy, that's a tree. All right. So we could view that negative. It's not really a negative interaction; it's redirecting. But we can view that as kind of an adverse reaction to them given a response. So basically, that's all that behaviorist is. A behaviorist perspective is. Now, there are a couple limitations to behaviorists. One of the problems is that children come up with their own way of saying things. For example, using what and why when they're or how or whatever. They start developing these on their own. So, for example, If I'm around my infant and I say, where do you think you're going? And they pick up on where going. They just created their own syntax, their own string of words. They didn't pick up on everything else I said because they haven't developed those rules yet. So that's one of the criticisms of the behaviorist theory, is that it's not a one-for-one. If a child truly learns what they're exposed to and they're reinforced with that exposure, then it would be a little bit more clear that they're actually trying to repeat what we're saying. Kind of like a parrot, right? If you get a Polly a cracker, they'll say anything verbatim as to compared to what you said, right? Another theory, prominent theory, is the linguistic theory. Oops, linguistic. So linguistic theory proposes that we are hardwired for language, for grammar. And to some degree, we can agree with that, right? We can see that based on what areas of the brain light up, specifically Broca's area, which is responsible for interpreting language that we're receiving. We can see children that may have minimal functioning in those areas, like maybe some kind of birth defect or damage, are less likely to pick up grammar or pick up even speaking abilities for that matter, right? Their word count is going to be much lower. So, but anyway, the linguistic theory proposes that we have hardwired areas for grammar, and we can kind of see that, especially with other animals, right? Other animals aren't able to learn languages, and they've done extensive research on chimpanzees to see if they can, and some through sign language, of course. Obviously, they don't have the speaking ability, but chimpanzees might be able to reproduce what we would consider a form of communication, but it's usually limited to only 2 words. They don't understand gerunds. They don't understand participles. They certainly can't pick up on whether something's present or past, right? So they're limited on that. So that's one of the pieces of evidence that we offer to understand that language is unique to, spoken language is unique to humans. The other part that that linguistic theories propose is the critical period. Now, any of you that are going to be watching the movie tonight, you're going to understand what the critical period is, because that's all they really talk about, right? So it usually occurs up until about 10 years, or I'm sorry, 12 years of age. And it's the period where, and again, if you remember how many, we have 200 billion neurons that we're born with. And if we don't use them over time, they start to, we have a pruning. We have an effect that where their ability to form new neural pathways is very limited. So that happens very pronounced for children that don't gain any kind of language exposure up through about 12 years of age, because anything after that, it's going to be difficult, if not impossible, to gain a language ability. And you'll see that the most famous one, in fact, I think your book even highlighted it, was the case of Jeannie, which is what Mockingbird Don't Sing is going to talk about. Okay. All right. So that is really the linguistic behavior, is that it's a hardwired, our brains are hardwired for grammar. All right. The other theory is the cognitive. Cognitive theory is just, put simply, a desire, not a desire to learn, piecing things together. So if you remember, like Gestalt, one of Gestalt that your book covered is being able to form an idea out of incomplete smaller ideas, subcategories. Like if you remember the triangle, even though, like if we had, I don't know if you can see this off to the side, but according to Gestalt, we would see a triangle because our mind tries to piece things together, right? So in this approach, it's like a child has they're developing columns. If you look at, like, I think your book used the example of an Excel spreadsheet where they have a column for reoccurring issues. Like maybe they're at a park and they see a ball and they hear somebody say the word ball frequently. Or if they hear them say yay or throw or something like that, that's a repetitive word that they're going to put in one column. And then they're going to associate that with only limited with certain situations that they see that, right? So for example, they're in the park and they hear ball, throw, and play. I have a really funny example. My youngest son, we took out to McDonald's. Once in a while, we go through drive-through and order food. And one day we're going through drive-through, and he was, I think he was about 2.5 at the time, I believe. And from the back seat in his car seat, we pull up and the lady gets on there and say, "How may I help you?" And out of the back seat, we heard fry, burg, shake. He was ordering his food because he knew within that context, whenever we went through, when he heard that loudspeaker, that's what you said. But he was picking up on that routine and he put that in the context of fast food. So that's an example of what a cognitive theorist would look at, is piecing together the repetitive words and the context in which they're using it. All right. Now the social interaction theory. Social interaction looks at motivation. Motivation to get what the child wants, kind of like a behaviorist, right? Because they're reinforced in some way. But they're going to be more likely to pick up on things that are very salient to what their needs are. Like if they want a juice, if they're thirsty, they're going to be at first, up until about I think about 18 months, we're going to see them point. They might mix that up and say baba, right? They might get that 2-syllable in there. But for the most part, they're motivated to communicating with their parents, and the parents are kind of engaging in parentese because they want to communicate with their child, right? Because the quicker they can communicate with each other, the less crying they're going to have, right? They're not going to necessarily be crying at night and you have to guess what's happening. The child is going to know what they need to say in what context, and the parents are going to try and meet them halfway, or well, not really halfway, but try and get them to that point where they can communicate fluidly. All right, so that's really all there is to the social interaction theory. All right, so I know we're running up on time here, and I've got quite a couple of you that need to stay behind to speak on one-on-one. So are there any questions? Did I kind of give you a better understanding of these theories?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, all right. Are there any other questions or anything? Anybody have anything for me? All right. Well, if there's nothing else, have a great weekend. I'll see you all here on Tuesday. Don't forget you have your group. No, I'm sorry. Disregard. You don't have your group assignments this week. It's next week. All right. Didn't mean to scare you. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Have a good week.
A great
Thank
week.
you.